Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our June First Friday Club of our 20th season. I'm Mary Ellen Brannigan, and I'm pitch hitting for Marcy today. She's 3 weeks post-knee replacement and doing pretty well. Before I get into this, I also want us to all acknowledge Elvira and David Bell. They are celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary this month. As a reminder, if anyone needs religious education certification, sign the form at the registration desk. Also, please silence your cell phones. If you want to find more information on our programs or any changes, please like us on Facebook. And those of you that have provided your email addresses, we will send you any changes, updates, as well as the monthly flyer. Our speaker last month, Matthew Schmaltz, people asked about the book he said he wrote, and he sent us a couple of the books. There's information on the registration desk. On the cover, it's a picture of the cover, and you can buy it on Amazon if you so desire to get that book. Our 21st season's presenters are totally booked. Thank you to my programming committee. We are all relieved that it is done. We will have the full flyers probably for you next month, but on your table you'll find just a copy that I did on my home computer. There's just a couple on each table, but it'll let you know ahead of time who the speakers are and what their topics are and the dates. 11 of the 12 will be new speakers for us. They're all experienced speakers, they've just never spoken to First Friday Club. Next month's presentation will be July 9th. Just to confuse you, it'll be the second Thursday of the month because of the 4th of July. Stephen Crummer, who is a teacher at Sacred Heart Seminary in Wisconsin, will talk to us about evangelization, encouraging an encounter with Jesus. And a flyer with his background information is at the registration table. I want to thank Ann Kravitz for sponsoring our speaker today. And David Gibson will entertain questions during the last 10 minutes of his presentation. Before Ann introduces our speaker, I'm mixing things up a little bit with a different prayer. Many of you knew Eileen Novotny, Ray's wife, and she was a great supporter of the First Friday Club. And a few years ago, she wrote a prayer for us. So I'd like for all of you to bow your heads, remembering our presenter and all who have gathered in this room. Creator God, source and origin of every blessing, we thank you for the nourishment for our bodies, minds, and spirits that we are about to share. Be with all who are suffering hunger, violence, oppression, homelessness, and illness. Move us with compassion to work toward a better, more just world. Amen.
Hello, everyone. It was really my privilege to spend an hour with David on the way back from the Pittsburgh airport. When I first reached out to him a little over a year ago, all of our contact has been through email, and it's so much more interesting to actually meet the person behind the name and the bio and the different things. But when I contacted him last year by email, his initial response was he was currently in Rome at the conclave and that he would get back to me very soon. And I thought, oh, that's good. He's at the conclave covering the conclave. Well, Leo was elected. The next night, my husband and I were watching NBC News, and we usually the TV goes off after that, but it was Inside Edition, and because it was on the conclave, we kept it on, and we're watching, and all of a sudden, there's this gentleman being interviewed, and a little trailer at the bottom said, David Gibson, Fordham University. I thought, oh, well, that's really good. And then 3 days later, I look at the New York Times, and there's an opinion piece. David Gibson. I thought, well, we really hit the ball out of the park. So we're anticipating a great deal. No pressure, David, but he has been the director of the Center for Religion and Culture at Fordham University since 2017. Prior to that, he was had an award-winning career for many religious publications and journals. And he is a convert, and as we all know, converts make the best Catholics, or at least so we are told. And just talking to him on the way back from the airport, David has a great passion for the Catholic Church and all of the issues that it is facing right now. He spends a great deal of time in Rome. He will be heading back to Rome next week. And he is as most, I think all of us are, we are in awe of Pope Leo, and he will be talking about some of that, and of course his new encyclical. So it is really with great pleasure that I introduce David, and I think we're in for a real treat.
Thank you so much, Anne. Can you all hear me? You should give Anne a medal because she's had to put up with me for the past year and a half, and you should give these two a medal. It's like 50 years married. Teen marriage is good in Ohio, I guess. So it's obviously. I was saying I got a late start. I got a late start in everything in life. I became Catholic at 30 after working at the Vatican, which is a whole other story. No one ever goes to Rome and finds faith. I got married at 44 and I had a kid at 46. Yeah, I know, it's a young person's game, so get started early. But truly, thank you all for your patience. Thanks to Anne so very much. I'm so happy to be here. It's just been quite a turbulent couple of years. It always is. If you're a career journalist and on the Vatican beat, because things happen. It's like I remember when Pope Benedict resigned, my phone rings at 5 in the morning, and February 2013, and someone says, the Pope has resigned. Can you give us a comment? I'm like, with an epithet I won't repeat, I said, Popes don't resign. What's going on? This is not a good time for me. And it's never a good time. And of course, Francis, who was great, and he was ill for a while. We didn't know what was going to happen. We thought he was getting better, and. My mother's been in hospice. She was 96. I didn't know who was going to go first, Francis or my mother. And my mother passed, and then Pope Francis passed. And then, when the Pope passed, I was going to go to Rome, but we were having my mother's memorial the same day as the Pope's funeral. And so I thought my Blessed Mother would not forgive me if I went to the Holy Father's funeral instead of hers. So the day after her memorial, I went. And it's just been, so I appreciate your flexibility and your being out here in person, and this great tradition that you have coming together in person. I think it's so great. And again, when we came up to this title after Leo was elected, who knew? American Pope, American Church, what he means for American Catholicism. So I'm just going to go through some things, buzz through some history and some of how he got to be elected. And I want to take your questions, whatever questions you have. But the first question you should have, which I have to answer, is why am I here talking to you? And there's really only one answer to that. So I've been doing it for a very long time. Yeah, that's me on the right. I hate when people have that reaction. They're like, oh my God, is that him? It is, yeah. 1986. When I was working at Vatican Radio. I appreciate your seeing me on TV. I always say I have a face for radio. And that's a whole other long story, how I came to be living in Rome as a young man, got my start in journalism, worked for the English program. The Jesuits run Vatican Radio. a Protestant at the time. Thank God for the Jesuits. They always protected me when the folks at the Secretary of State said, why are we paying a Protestant to be on the payroll? And they would always say, well, he's taking instruction. Which I kind of was, and at the end, I actually became Catholic. It was about the same time as this guy was there too. Kind of looks similar, doesn't it? Boom. No, not bad. It's like, so he's been doing it for a long time too. Robert Prevost meeting Pope John Paul II. So what I want to do is because we're Trinitarian, I want to do three things. Who is Robert Prevost? How was he elected Pope? And what does it mean for the church in our world? Well, the first thing I think we need to know is he's an American. From Chicago, of all things, a White Sox fan, of all things. He has so much White Sox swag now that he's Pope. Every time I'm helping a group of Fordham trustees go to Rome in a couple of weeks. I have to go over there and meeting with the Pope, and they're going to give him a Fordham jersey with Leo the 14th on the back, and it's like, that's what everybody does. And but he's a good sport about it. But the fact that he's he's an American, a deeply American, you have to remember that. But the fact that he's a White Sox fan means he also has a sense of suffering. And, he knows pain, and he knows our pain. He also has brothers. He's the youngest of three brothers. And his older brother loves Donald Trump. He's elected. Donald Trump invites him to the Oval Office. So he's got a MAGA brother. He's just like us. I can tell you from my family, we have to avoid certain conversations. They're hilarious. It's wonderful. He talks to his brothers all the time. And Louis Trump, the MAGA guy, he loves Donald Trump. He says, we talk about some things, we avoid politics. I'm like, that's us. Also, I think you have to know he's an Augustinian monk, and it's important to know, again, we had Pope Francis was the first Jesuit pope in history. Again, everybody talks about how the church is always the same. We never change. Okay, in the last decade or so, you had the first pope to resign in 600 years. You had the first Jesuit elected pope. You had the first pope to take the name Francis. You had the first pope from the Southern Hemisphere. That's incredible, isn't it? So he was the first Jesuit pope, and as I like to tell people, probably the last Jesuit pope, given what a lot of people thought. And now you've got the first Augustinian pope. I'm sorry?
First Polish.
And we had, yeah, exactly. In '78, Karol Wojtyła broke the Italian stranglehold. I'll get to that when we come back to the last year's conclave. First Polish pope, first German pope in Ratzinger, and not only so you have the first Augustinian pope, but the first American. So it's crazy. But I think that the important thing is, and again, this is not incidental. I think there's an interesting aspect about having religious order, priests, bishops, cardinals elected to be pope. I think that says a lot about what we need in the church and about the dynamics of religious orders, and how I think that communal focus can help us amid so much strife in the church and outside. And again, I think, Francis basically took us on a church-wide 13-year-long Ignatian retreat. It was all about discernment, all that kind of thing. Fordham loved it, But it was also kind of nice to be out of the spotlight. Now it's on the Augustinians, and that's a great thing for the church as well. But to remember, again, the Augustinians founded according to that rule of Augustine from the 5th century, living in community, but it founded in the 13th century with the Augustinians. But, the things that really mark their lives are living in community, living in cities, but outreach to the poor and service. They really are contemplatives in action, and that's very much who he is. He's sort of, building a little community that he can live in as the Pope, because again, I won't get into it too much, but this is my 3rd conclave. As I said, I've been at it for a long time. Hopefully it's my last. The becoming Pope is a really disorienting thing. You fly to Rome, usually. He was living there, luckily. You go into a conclave, they elect you. You put on a white suit that you'll never take off. They give you a name that's not yours and an address that you've never lived in before. And that's it. Pope Francis, he was 76, ready to retire, flies from Buenos Aires, was going to go back. He never returned home. It's a fascinating thing. He never, ever returned home. It's a poignant thing. Anyway, so what else is Robert Prevost? Absolutely.
With Francis, was that a choice or was that expected?
That he did not return. There's a lot that goes into that, and it's such an interesting dynamic. You know, Pope John Paul returned home during the Cold War, helped bring down the Soviet Union, goes home as a conquering hero, millions coming out in the piazzas in Poland. Such an astonishing thing. Benedict goes back. I think his first trip after his election was pre-planned World Youth Day to Germany. Argentina is a bit of a mess, and politically, and he could not go home without. They were very divided on him there. I'm sure he would have been welcomed, but politically, it would have been so difficult. And the fact that he went to South America, he would go to Uruguay, Paraguay, Ecuador, all around his home country, and never went. But I suspect Leo knows how he feels, because I know he would very much like to come to the United States and to Chicago. I'm not sure that's going to happen until 2029. This is an election year. Everything would be a circus if the Pope came back. So it's the reality. You've got to, and you have to be invited. The Pope doesn't come to a country. He has to be invited by the government. So, anyway, it's complicated. So what else is Robert Prevost? He's a math major, very precise. He's a canon lawyer, very precise. Does the Wordle every day. He actually bragged to my colleagues in the Vatican Press Corps. They were going to, he does it every day. They were going to Africa. He said, I got it in 3. He got the Wordle in 3. I think that's very unbecoming to brag about it. He's calm, disciplined. He's calm. They call him Il Papa Calmo, as opposed to the Argentine Pope. I love Francis. He was great. But he'd shoot off the cuff once in a... Robert Prevost is very calm, orderly. He has a great sense of humor. I was talking to a friend of his who said they met for 2 hours recently, and they laughed for half of that time. They were laughing. That's important. Loves to play tennis. Day after his election, it was hilarious. I was there in Rome. The front page of the Messaggero newspaper was an interview with his personal trainer at the gym. He is so American. We have a Pope who goes to the gym. But it was so hilarious because it's Robert Prevost, and he would just go to this gym in Rome. And the guy didn't even know, he thought he was just some American priest. He didn't know he was a cardinal. And then this guy, the guy you help at the gym, walks out on the balcony wearing white. And you're like, wait a minute. And it's so funny because it's so Italian, so sort of, he says, yeah, he's such a nice guy. And his body mass index is very good. He's very healthy. He's a missionary, above all, and I'll get to this. Again, here he is dishing out food in Peru. And you know this, on horseback. I met his horse, by the way. He was given a thoroughbred horse. I went up to Castel Gandolfo where he keeps it. And beautiful horse, but he rides a different one because the one that some Polish group gave him a very thoroughbred Arabian horse, but it's so delicate. There he is, after the floods in Chiclayo. He's a missionary. He's spent much of his life. He's an American, but he spent much of his life in Peru as a missionary priest, later as a bishop. That has marked him. When he was elected, all the newspapers, it was great. First American Pope. You know what the headline was in Peru? El primo Papa Peruano, the first Peruvian Pope. He has Peruvian citizenship. It all depends on your perspective, doesn't it? He's a missionary. So, how did he get elected? How many of you seen the movie Conclave? Great, so we can skip over this part. You know everything. And it's actually not bad. I can talk more about the movie Conclave later. But it was actually a pretty good movie. I read the books, I read all of those, I call it Pope fiction, not pop fiction, but it's like, all those things. They're usually so over the top, Da Vinci. And the book was, the movie was great, except for the ending, which was just like this thing. The dynamics, actually, of these men in the conclave, and a woman. The real crime about the movie was that Isabella Rossellini, who is like one of my favorites. She's got so little screen time. They needed to have more of her. But watch it, it's pretty good. But it didn't quite end the way this conclave did last year. So what is a conclave? And I just want to take you through a quick spin through a couple thousand years of church history, because I think it's important to know where conclaves came from. You know, again, it goes back to what is a pope. And we talk a lot about this, but you have to remember there's so much accretion built on top of this, and tradition, and we want to act like it's always been done this way. That's the standard Catholic line. Why do you do it? Because we've always done it this way. No, we haven't. What's a pope? Pope is the Bishop of Rome. The only reason he's a pope is he's the Bishop of Rome. He's a bishop. How do you get a bishop? You know, and again, he's upon this rock, the inside of the drum of St. Peter's Basilica, you know, give you the keys to the kingdom. But he's a bishop. And in the early days, if you know any church history, there were a lot of ways to get your bishop. Usually you elected them. It was a vox populi. Sometimes the pope would come out of after being the local priests, or people would elect him. He would come out and everybody would boo, give a thumbs down, they'd go back in. Sometimes there were a couple stories in early centuries. They were all gathered, the priests, and a dove landed on somebody's shoulder. A dove landed on the shoulder. Sign of the Holy Spirit. Let's make him pope. That makes sense. I think it's, someone counted up that there are at least 18 different ways that popes have been elected or chosen over the centuries. And of course, in the uglier days of the Renaissance and the Middle Ages, often this power said this is going to be pope. You know, up until a century ago, some of the Catholic powers, until 1914 conclave, there was a jus exclusive. The certain Austro-Hungarian Empire and others had the right of veto. If they didn't like a pope who was emerging, they would say no. That's only a century ago. The historian Miles Pattenden is great, as he says, the birth of the modern conclave was a process, not an event. I have to read this too. I don't have it in my notes. The main development of what we know today as a conclave was in three parts, mainly in the 12th century, 12th and 13th century. Pope Nicholas. So before it's priests and bishops of Rome would elect the Pope. 1059, he limits the electors to the clergy of Rome and the College of Cardinals. It excludes lay people. Been downhill for us ever since. 1179, Alexander III say that 2/3 majority to be elected Pope. And then 1274, following the longest conclave in history, it was like 2 years and 10 months. They couldn't come to a decision, and it was in Viterbo, a town outside of Rome, and that's when the townspeople, again, we talk about how crazy things are. The townspeople in Viterbo, they were tired of feeding these guys, and this is 2 years, 10 months. We need a pope. They tore off the roof of where they were meeting. They locked them inside, and they gave them bread and water. And if you know anything about cardinals, they like to eat. And so they quickly came to a decision. And the Pope who was elected out of that said, okay, done. We're going to have, he set the new, so you have these rules over these couple of centuries in the Middle Ages. Only cardinals, 2/3 majority, and conclave with a key. Closed, you're locked in, closed with a key until you come up with a successor. This is all my, Jeopardy preparation for you all, so you'll all be the smartest people at the table. Just some little, out of 267 popes, 267, just 26 have been elected in the Sistine Chapel. They used to be elected all over the place. The last conclave held outside of Rome was in Venice in 1800, because Napoleon was in charge. Napoleon kidnapped 2 popes in a row. The papacy was almost a done thing in the 19th century. In 1878, it was almost held in Malta, because it was 1870s, you know, the Italian state, the rise of the nation states. Germany, Italy wasn't even a country until 1870. They took over the papal states. The Pope became a prisoner of the Vatican. That was our kind of anti-modern, pull up the moats. You're going to lock us in the Vatican. We're not going to deal with the modern world. It took a century for us to get over that. But they were so upset about the idea of cardinals having to come to Rome that they had a thought to hold the conclave in Malta, and they were going to bring in the cardinals by hot air balloons. This was a real thing. Innovative for the church. And also, but it had been held largely in the Vatican since then, in the last century. But the conditions, if you read about it, even 1978, the year of 3 popes, Paul VI died. They elected John Paul I. Everybody forgets about him. Wonderful man. 33 days, boom, dead. And innumerable thriller movies, Godfather 3, written about it. They have to come back. But this is August, and in October they come back and they elect John Paul II. But they had to put, I remember I was there a few years after that, you know, everybody who lived up, and they took over all the apartments of people who lived there. They had chamber pots. They had cots, and you know, this is a geriarchy. It's not a hierarchy. It's like these are old guys, you know. And as the older I get, I feel for them. So Pope John Paul II built the Domus Santa Marta. This it's a Motel 6 basically on the Vatican grounds, so that they can have a decent, you know, bathroom and a hotel room. Very simple, but very wonderful, so that they can live in, you know, John Paul was so scandalized by how hot. There's no air conditioning. It's August. It's Rome. Chamber pots, cots, the whole thing. No wonder they got it done in a day. They're like, they were going home. The Dome of Santa Marta, so they can live there. And of course, Pope Francis decided not to move to the Apostolic Palace. He stayed there on the 2nd floor, which was a wonderful gesture. Kind of, you know, discombobulated. It was terrible for security. He would kind of come down to the lunchroom and just kind of show up at the buffet line. Balloting secrecy is a whole other thing. We can talk about that another time. One of my favorite factoids, though, is white smoke. There's nothing in the Catholic Church that, no meme, no anything that has bled into the popular culture as much as white smoke, signaling the election of a leader. The first time white smoke was used was 1914. I love that. Everybody's like, oh, this is the way we've always done it. No, it's been a century since you did that. And it was always a disaster. What really signals the election of Pope is the ringing of the bells. And the bells ring, and everybody in Rome, all the Romans know, we've elected a new Pope. They come charging into St. Peter's Square. So they wanted to use smoke, burning the ballots, but there's a thing you put in dry straw, and it'll turn it black. You put in wet straw, and it'll turn it white. When you're burning the ballots because of the secrecy, and that only started also in the 19th century. You burn ballots because you don't want any record of them, and so the white smoke comes up out of that little chimney that they install out in the Sistine Chapel. But, you know, wet straw, dry straw, it's usually gray. And everybody's out there saying, yeah, what's going on? And again, in 2005 it happened. But what they did was they got this, I don't have a picture of it here, but they took us all on a tour of the Sistine Chapel as journalists beforehand. And they had they were really proud, this new stove, kind of fancy techno stove. And it was hooked up to the furnace that they've used for forever. And they explained to the guys, so they had these different cartridges. So they said, okay, when you don't have a Pope successful thing, you put in a black cartridge and it'll go black smoke. When you do get a successful ballot, you have a new Pope, you put in a white cartridge into this thing, press the button, white smoke will come out. They did something wrong. Cardinal Mahoney was telling us, they didn't close the door. Smoke billowed into the Sistine Chapel. Can you imagine art conservators around the world are like, what are you doing? And he said it was basically it was trying to give your grandfather a new DVR and telling him to program it on your own. These guys are all 80 years old. They're like, what? What is this technology? They got it right. 2013 was much better. And this time was, boom, you saw, okay, that's black smoke. And then when the white smoke came out, it was very clear. I love, everybody asks, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but everyone asks, doesn't the Holy Spirit really work here? And Joseph Ratzinger, no liberal, had this great quote: the Holy Spirit's role should be understood in a more elastic sense. Not that he dictates the candidate for whom one must vote. The only assurance the Holy Spirit offers is that the thing cannot be totally ruined. There are too many contrary instances of popes that the Holy Spirit obviously would not have picked. I think that's wonderful and very human and very wise, frankly. So, the other thing about the modern day conclave and the surprise about Leo is nobody knows what is going to happen. I can't stress that enough. I've covered the Vatican, I've covered 3 conclaves. These political reporters who cover the White House, the presidency, election night, you're going to get one of 2 people. That's easy. 133 went into this conclave, more than ever in history. It was 113, I think, in 2005, 115 in 2013, 133. Any one of them could have come out on the balcony, and you have to be an instant expert on whoever that person is. It's not easy. It's a little hair-raising. You're doing all these, profiles ahead of time because you want to be the first out there. So, and people are trying to guess, and they're trying to handicap, but nobody really knows. There are more cardinals than ever. It's a sea of red. Everybody's talking about betting. PattyPower.com, the website, betting website, PattyPower.com. I don't know if you can read all this. This is a screenshot from the day before the conclave. They had Paroline, Tagle, Turkson. Look at all those things. They got all the odds. You know whose name is not on there? Bingo. No Robert Prevost. I should, as someone told me, the day I showed up, a friend of mine in the Vatican, he said, don't count out Prevost. He said, he's good. He was 35-1. I missed my chance. I should have listened. Always listen to Vatican insiders. One of the problems, and so the big thing is the big dynamic that goes on. Again, you have to understand the dynamics that go into it, is these guys don't know each other. Everybody thinks this is an old boys club. The curate, back in the Renaissance days, they were all Italian cardinals from Rome. They all knew each other. They all hated each other. They would all poison each other. But Francis was so funny in Argentine. The Argentines have their matcha, their mate things, the communal tea. And you'd go around St. Peter's Square, and the Argentines would hand him, and the Pope Mobile hand him a mate cup, and he would sip from it and hand it back and laugh. Vatican security, out of their minds. They're like, Holy Father, you could, and he said to them, don't worry, they're Argentines. They're not my fellow cardinals. Literally, that's what he would say. He had a good sense of humor, too. The conclave College of Cardinals is modeled on the Roman Senate, or our Senate. It's the deliberative wise men of the church, right? The problem is, in our Senate, for example, you're elected in California, you move to Washington, and you're there, and you deliberate with people all year long. It's the opposite in the church. Pope calls you up, I'm making you a cardinal. A month later, you go to Rome, you get a red hat, then you go back to the Philippines,
or Mongolia or Syria or wherever, and you may not come back again. You may never see these guys again. I just want to... Pope Francis created cardinals from 72 different nations. 24 of those nations had never had a cardinal before. I loved him. He wanted this is a global church. He wanted to push to the peripheries. Cardinal in Indonesia, cardinal in Mongolia, cardinal in Haiti. It's all wonderful, but they're further flung than ever. So what happens when you come together? Nobody knows how to do it. So what do? Like Robert Prevost, you watch the movie Conclave, so you can figure out what to do, because he doesn't have any idea better than we do. And he really did. So what do you do? How does this happen? How do these guys come together apart from the Holy Spirit? And again, this isn't a Ouija board. This isn't a seance where they're going to sit there. And also the other problem with the movie Conclave, like every conclave movie, is everything happens in the conclave in the Sistine Chapel. That's not the case. How do they pick a pope? The general congregations. What are those? Those start the day after a pope dies, and the cardinals, as the cardinals are coming into town, for about 2 weeks before the actual conclave, all of the cardinals meet in private, they're closed meetings, in a big meeting hall in the Vatican. There were 133 electors. Again, also the way things have changed very much is Paul VI, much to the chagrin of the cardinals, he put an age limit at 80. As soon as you turn 80, you lose your right to vote in a conclave. In the general congregations, every cardinal has 5 minutes to get up and give a talk about what they see as the vision of the church. They don't campaign for anyone. They don't say, you'd be the best guy, but they talk about a vision of the church. But the thing is, all of the cardinals can participate, which means there are about 240 cardinals, over half of them over 80. And they're kind of stung at losing their privileges, so when they get the mic, they tend not to give it up. And they're ringing bells and telling them to sit down, so these kind of things go on and on. But it is the chance for the cardinals to vet each other, to kind of get a sense of who this person is. So they all get up, and over these 10 days, they get up and they give a talk, and you get a sense of where people, the sense of the body, the sense of the room, what do we need? 2013, it was Cardinal Bergoglio. You should look it up. He only used 4 minutes of his time, and he gave the most powerful, beautiful talk. He talked about the theological narcissism of the church. He said in Revelation, there's the image of Jesus knocking on the door. He said, sometimes I think it's Jesus is knocking because he's locked inside the church and he wants to get out. And he said, the danger is spiritual worldliness. Delubach's phrase, spiritual worldliness, is the greatest danger of the church. We have to be evangelical. We have to be a missionary church. 4 minutes, 48 hours later, they elected him pope. There was no moment like that in this one. In fact, the first thing they had to do, the first request that the cardinals made when they gathered, name tags. Literally, hi, my name is Cardinal Joe. They don't know who each other is. And there were just rumors. I mean, the movie was nothing compared to the rumors. Being there, it was just insane. The Italians said, getting back to the Italians, 2 big dynamics in this conclave. The conservatives wanted to take back the papacy. Too much Francis, too much of this new stuff, all that kind of thing. We want to take it back. The Italians said, no, we want to take it back. It's ours. They were pushing Cardinal Parolin, the Cardinal Secretary of State. The cardinals were telling me, I got off the plane, some guy came up, said, you got to vote for Parolin. Another fellow cardinal said, you got to vote for Parolin. The politicking was intense. Conservatives were pushing Cardinal Erdo of Hungary. Cardinal Becciu, the Sardinian cardinal who'd been at the Secretary of State, and Pope Francis stripped his right to vote in the conclave because he was so scandal-ridden, so many financial... He spent 2 days in the general congregations demanding that he be allowed to vote. It was insane. Cardinal Tagle. I get a text all of a sudden, they're in the middle of these things, and I get a text that says, Tagle has gambling debts at a casino in Macau. Spread it around. I'm like, come on. But you're like, I don't know, maybe it's true. Who knows? We got to check it out. But also the conservatives who didn't want Tagle. Years ago, he was at a mass. He likes to sing. He was singing John Lennon's Imagine, blah, blah, blah. That was circulating in social media to try and kill his chances. And of course, you also have this guy, you're there, and this is an actual thing that Donald Trump posted of himself in the middle of the conclave, in the middle of these things. And you're like, whatever you think politically, it's like, what else can go on here? So they debate and they discuss, etc. Then they go into the conclave proper. The first night, I could tell you, it just went on, and they had all these technical things. They were starving. They didn't get out till like 9:45 at night. These guys are starving. They go back to the Casa Santa Marta, they're like, this is crazy. Basically the dynamics, the conservatives had fewer people. They had a small, but they thought everybody agreed with them, and Pope Francis was a disaster. They pushed too hard and too fast. Their champion, Cardinal Erdo, came out of the block, and the first ballot is kind of a shakeout. You vote for your friend, and you kind of see who's got 20, 30 votes. You needed 89 for 2/3 to become Pope. Parolin, the Italian, said, all the Italian media said Parolin's got it locked up. He's got 60 votes going in. He had maybe 40, first one. Erdo, maybe 25, 30. A guy named Prevost had 20, 25. The next morning, it started to shake out. Parolin. The problem with a conclave, if you don't keep going up, you go down. And Parolin collapsed. Erdo, here's the kind of thing that tell how to determine. They don't have any criminal background checks on the Pope. They don't have health checks. Cardinal, the second day, they choose by lot cardinals to be the tellers who will read out the votes. Cardinal Gibson gets vote blah, 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 blah. One of them was Cardinal Erdo, the Hungarian. The other one was Cardinal Prevost, the American. And the cardinals coming out were struck that Cardinal Erdo seemed to have a very weak voice. He just did not seem energetic. And Cardinal Prevost, 69 years old, was just very strong. And that influenced people. They're like, we don't, And it turns out, news just came out a couple of weeks ago, back in March, Cardinal Erdo suffered a stroke and has been incapacitated ever since. Imagine if they had elected him Pope. Leave aside the ideology, that would have been a disaster. So those are the kind of things that influence it. And basically, the pro-Francis folks, Francis had appointed 80% of these cardinals, but they were all divided. They were also split. They backed various different candidates. The conservatives all got behind Erdo. The Italians got behind Parolin. Neither of them was convincing. So they started looking at Prevost, an American. One of the things I was always taught, you'll never have an American Pope. Well, it made sense this time. And I don't think this video works. It was my own, yeah, don't worry. Oh yeah, there it is, yeah. It was the announcement, my own video of the announcement, which is so funny. I've been there for 3 of them. And it's such a moment, and the crowds are out there, and it's incredible. And they say, Gaudium Magnum Annuncio Vobis. And then they go to read the name, and I'm like, what? What are you saying? It's not that you don't have Latin, it's just they're over these loudspeakers. You can't even tell what they're saying. And all of a sudden they're like, El Americano, El Americano. I'm like, and all the Italians were like, this is the Bishop of Rome, this is their bishop. And they're like, beh, non è Italiano, it's not Italian. But he came out on the balcony. It was in the afternoon, the 4th ballot. They screwed up one ballot. cardinal, it was actually the fifth ballot because they were counting them, and there were 133 electors. They had 134 ballots. Like, something's wrong here. This is not Chicago. And so they had to go back and do it again. Some guy studied, the guy apologized. Another guy brought in his cell phone by accident. So there were a lot of things happening. But basically, so there was the Wednesday evening, first shakeout ballot. They have 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. Thursday morning, first ballot, you saw how things were going. Second one of the morning, it was clearly Provost. And he had he's very diligent. He prepared his thing. He knew where it was going. First ballot of the afternoon, we're all in the press office. All of a sudden, white smoke comes out. I cannot tell you the feeling when you're there. Everybody barrels out. You go into the square, the bells are ringing. For an hour later, because he's got to accept, he's got to go find a cassock that fits, he's got to go walk, he's got to, the whole thing. It takes an hour. Nobody knows. The white smoke comes out, nobody knows. And you're like, what's going on? Then the dean of the College of Cardinals comes out and announces it, and we have the first American Pope. So why? Why Prevost? He'll continue the Francis line. That's what he said right out. Synodality, a more inclusive outreach church. He was the least American of the Americans. Okay? He's an American Pope, but il meno americano degli americani. The least American. He'd never been a bishop in the United States. He was not part of the U.S. hierarchy. He was a bishop in Peru. In a sense, he's the first global pope for a global Catholicism. Wojtyła, John Paul II, very Polish, behind the Iron Curtain, had not traveled much. Ratzinger, yes, but a very studious, quiet guy. Francis, really an Argentine, had not traveled much, did not like to travel. Very big view of the world. Prevost had raised in America, worked 20 years in Peru, was head of the Augustinian order. Again, he was head of the order in Rome for 12 years, traveled all around the world. He knew Italian. That's really key. You're head of the Roman Curia. And then Francis brought him back in 2023 to be head of the Congregation of Bishops and made him a cardinal. So he knew the Curia, he knew the global church. He's a global church, global pope for our global church. He's in the Curia, but not of the Curia. He's not a lifer there, as most of them are. He speaks English. This was a huge issue. English is now unofficially the official language of the Church of the Vatican. This College of Cardinals is so internationalized, so non-European. What is the language they speak? I spoke to more African cardinals who were so happy that they could speak to somebody in English. Because usually they have to deal with these Italians who say, you got to speak our language, or they speak terrible English. Asians, all around the world. And again, he's fluent in Spanish, knows Italian. It was a great package. Also, he's young. He's young. I know, I'm turning 67 this month. He was 69. I'm so happy that the Pope is older than me. I lived through Barack Obama, a president who was younger than me. That was traumatic. If I ever lived through a Pope who's younger than me, I don't know what I'm going to do. But he is young. You have to realize, since 1995, when John Paul started getting Parkinson's, you haven't had a vibrant, vital Pope. Here you have this Pope who's he's so busy. He plays tennis, he rides his horse, he goes to Castel Gandolfo. He can carry the cross on the Good Friday processions, things like that. And Francis was just never that, he was amazing, but he was ill for a lot of that time. He was 76. Ratzinger was 78. Look, I'm heading towards there. There's nothing wrong with it. But to be Pope, it's a crushing job to have someone who can do that. So who is Pope Leo? Well, again, he took his name after Leo the 13th, the Pope of Rerum Novarum, social justice. He spoke about peace, social justice, not culture wars. He's calm. He's a unifier. He dresses like Benedict, talks like Francis. Dresses like Benedict, talks like Francis. He's trying to bring these things together. just to conclude, I'll say yes, he was described as the least American of the Americans. But I think it's also important to recognize how much the cardinals of the conclave last May, a year ago, were in fact voting specifically for an American pope. But an American who, for many of them, and some of us, represents an America that they fear is disappearing. The cardinals chose an immigrant, multi-ethnic, internationalist Catholic who prizes dialogue and charity, the common good, mixes high ideals with principled pragmatism. Very American. And they chose him just as America is turning in on itself and away from many of those virtues. American Catholicism is a church of immigrants, much as America is a nation of immigrants. That is the country and the church that combine to produce an American pope, just as we're taking a nativist turn and cutting ourselves off from an increasingly diverse global communion. We are 5% of a 1.4 billion member church. We can never forget that. Looked at another way, calling Robert Prevost the least American of the Americans was the rest of the church's way, the conclave's way, the cardinal's way of saying that Robert Prevost is the most American of what the world used to think of, or perhaps idealize, as the best of America and the best of American Catholicism. Many of the cardinals who voted for Cardinal Prevost seem to have been voting for an America that the rest of the world would like to see again. So perhaps the question that Leo's election ought to prompt is not how American he is, but how American and how Catholic we are. Thank you. I talked too much, now it's your turn. Please, you. Yes.
Wait a minute, wait a minute.
Oops.
That was a wonderful presentation.
Oh.
And you know it, too. Anyhow, I'm curious to know about the politics of electing the Pope. And the reason why I'm asking this is because it was my understanding, whether it's right or whether it's wrong, that apparently Francis was grooming Pope Leo prior to his death and meeting like on a weekly basis. And I'm not sure whether that's accurate or not. I mean, it sounds like it's reasonable, but at the same time...
Well, I think it turns out, you know, Francis really liked Prevost. I mean, how do these things go? I mean, Prevost is so funny. He said when Francis was elected, as head of the Augustinians, he would go around the world and you have to deal with bishops. He went to Buenos Aires and Francis Bergoglio, tough Jesuit, and they had this big, you know, Francis wanted these Augustinians to stay here, and Prevost said, no, we need them over here. They butted heads. And when Francis got elected Pope, Prevost said, well, I don't ever have to worry about becoming a bishop. And but Francis liked people who pushed back, and he liked Prevost, and he made him a bishop. But it's also fascinating, he brought him to the Curia, head of the Congregation for Bishops, which is basically the HR office for vetting bishops. He brought a missionary, that's traditionally an Italian cardinal, career curialist, has that job. He brought a missionary bishop to pick bishops, help pick bishops from around the world. As part of that, like with the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or the dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Pope would meet with him. That's a huge thing. What does the Pope do? The Pope picks bishops. That's one of the, and cardinals. He would meet with them for a couple hours every week, and he was so impressed with Cardinal Prevost. He said to somebody, he said, I think he's a saint. So in that sense, and he would say, look, you know, whoever comes after me has got to be a more orderly personality. They need a little bit of calm. You can, you know, Jerry O'Connell and his wife Bette Piquet wrote it, the best insider guide. They said Pope Francis' last surprise, because Jerry and Bette loved Francis and they were close to him. Bette's Argentine. But you can't, there's that phrase, qui entra un papa esce un cardinale. He who goes into the conclave, a pope, comes out a cardinal. They do not like favorites. They don't want you, the cardinals go in there, they don't want you to tell them who's going to be the next pope. So that would have worked against him if they thought that Francis was tipping the scales. So I don't think Francis would be displeased. Maybe he'll contradict me, but, and I think he's right. I think he's a perfect choice, but I don't think it was programmed that much.
And just a quick question about communication. Cardinals from all over the world, obviously they don't speak universally English or Spanish or Italian. How do they work that in?
Again, English.
English.
Again, yeah, but that's the best common language, especially in Africa and in Asia. That's a language that's common to everyone. They were so relieved to be able, they had translation in the general congregations, they have the translation. When you go to the conclave, there's nothing happening. They call it some of the liturgy. You talk to them, they're so funny. Cardinal David my favorite because his name's David, from the Philippines. I was hoping for him. But he would talk about, he was just you're in the Sistine Chapel, and it's so beautiful, and you're staring up at the Last Judgment and the ceiling. And he said, all of a sudden it's like, oh, my neck, it's killing me. It was so funny because you're just sitting there staring up. It's just hours it takes for, all this. But there's nothing, it's the side, the murmuratio. It's the conversations over cocktails and coffee during the general congregations. When people say, what about that guy?
That was going to be my question, but here's something else. So when Pope Leo was elected, we watched the election on my little cell phone, my mother and I, in assisted living, having lunch with all the other residents around us. And she was glued to it, and so were the servers. And when it came out, they said his name, and I'm like, what? What? Everybody's reaction. They all cheered because it was an American. But my question is, how do you think his election will affect the American church? I've gotten pushback from putting out some of his quotes about when our president said the Iranian culture is going to be blown off the face of the earth, and he came back and said that's never appropriate. What will be his effect? Will we come together and realize that we're just a minority?
I tend to be pessimistic, but I live in hope because that's what we do. But I do think he has a chance. His personality is such that he really, a couple of dynamics, I don't know what's going to happen. The conservatives want to like conservatives, and I use those terms too broadly and whatever, but we're in a weird place. You've got the president attacking the Pope. This is, whatever you think of, I'm not getting into politics, whatever you think, it's just dumb politics. I mean, what are you doing? Who does that? And a Catholic vice president who's like, saying things, I don't understand any of it. And I think there's a couple of dynamics going on. And one reason I think people like Leo, he's fortunate in his enemies, or in his foes. And he doesn't have foes. Doesn't take it personally. As he says, he's not picking a fight with Trump. Trump sees it as a mano a mano. Leo does not. But you've got Trump here, and people are getting fed up. Catholics are kind of getting fed up, and they're like, okay, I may not agree with the Pope, but he's our Pope, And they're kind of like, stop. And AI. Everybody's like, what the heck is going on with AI? And so the Pope puts out an encyclical on this, and it's changed the entire global narrative. People are looking in an age when there seems to be no moral leaders, no moral center, nobody talking about it. Here he's talking about technology, politics, care of the neighbor, in a way that relates to people who are not just Catholic. And I think that's the important thing. I think conservatives didn't get what they wanted in the conclave, but he's doing everything. When he went to Chiclayo, the diocese in Peru, had been run by Opus Dei for decades. It was a mess. Scandals, right wing, really bad. He didn't kick them out, he won them over. As one of his friends says, he kills you with kindness. And they eventually moved them out and the other great thing he did when he went in, all of the priests were all missionary bishops, like missionary priests like him. By the time he left, they were all native Peruvians in the seminary. That's the kind of transformation. He's an amazing listener. At the same time, I think our church especially, again, he was elected by the global church. I talked to cardinals from around the world and they said, no, we want an American. We need someone who can stand up to Trump. When Trump cuts USAID, we think it's a political thing. You may agree, no, we need to cut it. You may disagree. This is a good. I talk African cardinals. That's thousands of people dead in their diocese. Do you understand? It's that. This is not a political issue. This is life and death. They want somebody who can represent a different value. He's a global pope. Our American culture and our American church is just so primed for opposition and reaction and polarization. I think there is a desire to not want to do that, to not be angry all the time. Will we choose that? Will we choose that path? And you see some are trying, he says things about migrants. He says things about peace. In this encyclical, we didn't talk about that. I read it. It's wonderful. It's a great précis on the first third of it on Catholic social teaching, which we needed. He apologizes for slavery. The church's teaching on slavery. You see people getting really triggered, and I follow on social media, but are they getting traction? I want to be hopeful, but again, the American church is not the global church. We're strange. Yeah.
3 quick things. Wonderful presentation in terms of looking at selection of popes, and particularly this pope. Second thing is, there's a great movie too, if you haven't seen it, called Two Popes.
Oh, I love that.
It's a wonderful film. And third, a lot that I've learned about popes and the church comes from Father Andrew Greeley, if you know his novels, and particularly the one White Smoke and the selection of Pope. So thank you very much for
Thank you. Yeah, there's so many of those great novels. Andy Greeley was a great guy, profiled him several times. I remember he came to New York once and he had a new book out. And I said, Andy, let's, it was March 17th. And he's all Mr. Irish Catholic, Irish American. I said, do you want to go to Fifth Avenue for the St. Patrick's Day parade? He said, oh, crazy, I wouldn't go near that thing. It's like National Amateur Drunk Day. So we went to an Italian restaurant and we did the interview there. Yes, Two Popes on Netflix. If you want to get a sense of the dynamics and the way the Murmuratio, it's fictionalized, it's about Bergoglio talking to Pope Benedict. And I have so many stories about that. I went to a screening of it. I went to a screening of it at the 92nd Street Y, which is the Jewish Y on the Upper East Side. And they were screening the Two Popes, and they had the director, and they had, who the heck played Francis? He's Jonathan, Price, yes. Wonderful actor, played Francis, spoke Spanish, and they were just, but person got up, and it was a largely Jewish audience, and they said, it reminded me of a dialogue between two rabbis. And I think that's really revealing. I think that's, the culture is more rabbinical kind of argument. The problem is, and what Francis did and why he angered so many people, is what he did is said out loud what everybody talks about in private, what priests, bishops, again, I came to the church at the Vatican, and we'd have those conversations all the time. But when they get in public, no, you have to support this, you have to say the company line. That's how you get ahead. But behind the scenes, they're like, no, we can't continue this way, this is crazy. But bringing it out into the open, that's such a great thing to do. I'm sorry, I've gone on too long. Anybody? I can stay as long as you like, so it's not, yeah. Do you have a couple other you want to do, or no? Yeah, go ahead. You've already been, we need somebody else. Anybody? Yeah. I'll talk to you afterwards.
Sir, you indicated that there was a significance to the fact that the 2 previous popes had been members of religious orders or communities. Mm-hmm. Could you say a little more on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was so, at least John Paul II was a diocesan bishop, so he had some of that pastoral experience. Ratzinger, not my cup of tea necessarily, a nice guy. He was great to deal with and to cover, very heady. I had an assignment, my first book was 2003 about the sex abuse scandals. Just stop and think, well, we all, like young people, they're like, this Pope is, Pope Francis is great talking about the environment. Pope Leo is terrific. Like, wait a minute, where were you 10 years ago when it was like no one would listen to the Catholic Church because of the scandals? There's a lesson there, which I'm still trying to kind of formulate, but how coming to terms with your own sins publicly can set up a way for you to be a prophetic voice later. But here you have, after John Paul died, millions of people in the street, they don't know what to do. They pick Ratzinger as a safe pair of hands. He was a curialist, he was a theologian, a university professor. He spent a few months in the parish. When they turned to Bergoglio, and I'm not sure they knew what they were getting. They probably had a lot of buyer's remorse. I think they thought they were getting one thing, but being in a religious community, you have a different sense of the world. You're in a global community. And again, we're a global church. We're in a different world now. And we're still, that's the big thing we're coming to terms with post-Vatican II. And in that you have that, and you have a communal discernment. It's much more, if you're a sister, it's much more about, being together, fighting, the whole thing. But it's a different way of being, and we are in this synodal church, in this synodal era, and that is critical. But also you have pastoral experience. You have much more experience on the ground. You're probably a missionary. That gives you, we're moving, again, from Ratzinger, Benedict, and John Paul could not escape the culture, the institutional culture. It was still, this is the way we had done it. Francis blew that up, and rightly so. We're in we have to shift to a different missionary mode, okay? That's going to be painful because I come from the evangelical world. Catholics don't do evangelization very well. We talk about it a lot, but this is a whole other topic. I don't think we know what it means to be a missionary Catholic in a Catholic community. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate your talk. Thank you all very much for coming. He led beautifully into our next month's speaker, who will be talking to us about evangelization. Thank you. Yes. So thank you. Remember, it is July the 9th, the second Thursday, because of the holiday. And also, as you know, we're recording all of these programs. So within probably about 3 weeks, it'll be available both on our website and on our YouTube channel. So if you want to watch what you just heard, or you've enjoyed it so much you want to talk about it to your friends, please, it's there for free for your watching. So thanks again for coming. And thank you. He will be available if you would like to talk.